Oh, Carol, we have a special little spot for you right over here. The wedding planner, a young woman with a tight smile and a clipboard, led me away from the main hall. The music was already loud, a thumping beat that made the floor vibrate under my sensible heels. We walked past tables draped in white linen and covered in flowers that smelled like a funeral. Table after table of familiar faces, Robert's cousins and my old church friends, all laughing and finding their seats. They waved. I smiled back, my hand feeling heavy at my side. The planner stopped beside a small round table meant for two, though it was set for only one. It was tucked behind a large white pillar, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed through, the doors flapped open, sending out a blast of hot air that smelled of garlic and dish soap. The table wobbled when I touched it. My stepdaughter, Tiffany, floated by in her cloud of a dress. "Tiffany, dear," I said, my voice steady. "Is this right?" She barely looked at me. Her eyes were scanning the bigger, more important tables. "Oh, yes, Carol. It's just so chaotic. We had to squeeze people in. You understand?" She patted my arm, a quick little tap, 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 and then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I sat down, smoothed the silk of my blue dress over my knees, and understood perfectly. I remembered the last year with Robert. The house was always quiet then, except for the hum of the oxygen machine and the soft rustle of bedsheets. I spent my days measuring medicines and making broth that he could barely swallow. The whole house smelled of antiseptic and chicken soup. His daughter, Tiffany, rarely visited. One afternoon I called her. Robert was having a good day. He was sitting up in his favourite chair, the one with the worn velvet arms, and watching the birds at the feeder. "He'd love to see you, honey," I said into the phone. "Just for a little while." I could hear her typing in the background. "I'd love to, Carol, but work is just insane." She sighed. "Mark and I have this trip planned for the weekend. A pre-wedding getaway, you know? You understand? Besides, you're there, right?" I looked at Robert, his hand resting on the afghan I had knitted for him. His knuckles were pale and thin. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm here." I hung up the phone and brought him a cup of tea. He didn't have the strength to lift it, so I held it to his lips. Back at the wedding, the dinner service started. Waiters in black vests swirled around the room with trays held high. They moved like a school of fish, flowing around the big, happy tables, completely missing my little island by the kitchen. The swinging doors became a constant rhythm. Whoosh thump, whoosh thump. Each time they were inches from my chair. I could hear the cooks shouting orders and the loud clang of pots and pans. After 20 minutes, a young man in a caterer's uniform noticed me. He had kind eyes and looked barely old enough to shave. He stopped in front of my wobbly table. "Ma'am, they seem to have forgotten you over here," he said, his voice soft under the music. "Can I get you the salmon? It's very good." I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen heat. "That would be lovely, young man. Thank you." "My name's Leo," he said, giving me a small, genuine smile. "Let me know if you need anything at all." Anything. He brought me a plate himself, and a glass of iced tea with a lemon wedge perched on the rim, just how I like it. The toasts began after the plates were cleared. The best man told a clumsy story from college. The maid of honour cried a little. Then the groom, Mark, stood up. He raised his champagne flute, the crystal catching the light from the chandeliers. He was a handsome man, I suppose, if you like the kind who are too proud of their own teeth. "To family," he boomed, "the people who made us who we are." He thanked his parents. He thanked Tiffany's mother, Sharon, who was sitting at the head table beaming. He talked about their future, their dreams, their new life together. He never once mentioned Robert, the father who had paid for Tiffany's education and her first car. He never mentioned me, the woman who had held Robert's hand as he left this world. It was a perfect speech, if you wanted to pretend the last 10 years never happened. I felt the crisp linen napkin in my lap. I folded it into a neat square, then unfolded it. Inside my good clutch purse, resting on the table, was the envelope. The check inside was for $25,000. It was the last of the money from the sale of the house Robert and I had shared. Our nest egg. I had promised him I would give it to Tiffany when she got married. Finally, it was Tiffany's turn. She stood up, a vision in white. She thanked her bridesmaids and her new in-laws. Then her eyes swept the room, and for a single moment they met mine. I saw a flicker of something in her gaze, a tiny, triumphant smirk. It was so fast I might have imagined it. "And a special thanks to everyone who helped us on our journey," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We're so excited to start our new life, buy our first home, and we just can't wait to see what the future holds." That was it. The cue. The moment she expected me to feel honored to contribute to that future. But the cold hurt in my chest was gone. In its place was a feeling as clear and calm as a quiet Sunday morning. I looked across the room and saw Leo, the young caterer. He was carefully pouring water for an elderly guest, his brow furrowed in concentration. The microphone was being passed down a nearby table for anyone else who wanted to make a toast. As it went from hand to hand, I stood up. My knees felt strong. I reached out as a man was about to pass it along. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and calm. "May I say a word?" The man looked surprised, but he handed it to me. A hush started to fall over the room as people turned to see the forgotten woman by the kitchen door, walking toward the dance floor. The microphone felt cool and heavy in my hand. The low hum of the speakers filled the sudden silence. 200 pairs of eyes were on me. Tiffany's smile was frozen on her face, a little too bright, a little too tight. Mark stood beside her, looking more annoyed than curious. He probably thought I was going to tell some long, boring story about his new wife as a little girl. I took a slow breath. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and spilled wine. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice came out smooth and even through the sound system. "I'm Carol, Robert's widow, and Tiffany's stepmother. I won't take up too much of your time." From the head table, I saw Tiffany whisper something to Mark. He shook his head slightly, his grip tightening on her arm. They wanted me to be quick, to be invisible again. "A wedding is a beautiful thing," I continued, letting my eyes drift over the guests. I saw my friend Martha from the quilting circle give me a small, encouraging nod. "It's a celebration of love, of course, but it's also a celebration of character. It's in moments like these, under all the stress and chaos, that you see who people really are." I looked directly at Tiffany. Her smile had vanished. "You learn that it's not the grand gestures that matter most. It's the small acts of kindness, a warm word, a glass of water for someone who is thirsty, a moment of attention for someone who has been overlooked." A nervous cough came from a table near the front. The wedding planner was staring at me, her clipboard held against her chest like a shield. I gave her a pleasant little smile. "Tonight," I said, my voice filled with genuine warmth, "I have been the recipient of such a kindness. While sitting at my lovely private table by the kitchen, a special spot just for me, I had the pleasure of meeting a young man who works for the catering company." I scanned the edge of the room until I saw him. Leo was standing near the swinging doors, frozen in place, a stack of dirty plates in his hands. His eyes were wide. "His name is Leo," I announced. When no one else noticed I hadn't been served, Leo brought me my dinner. He brought me iced tea. He checked on me and spoke to me with more warmth and respect than I have felt all day. A murmur went through the crowd. Tiffany's face was now the color of her dress. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the crisp, white envelope. I held it up for everyone to see. "I came here tonight with a substantial check in this envelope, a wedding gift from Robert and me, to help Tiffany and Mark start their new life." Mark straightened up, a flicker of greed in his eyes. Tiffany looked relieved, as if she thought this was all leading to a happy, sentimental ending. "But after witnessing true grace and decency here tonight," I said, my voice joyful and clear, "I've had a change of heart." I turned and walked toward the edge of the room, right to where Leo was standing. "So, I have decided to give this check, all $25,000 of it, to this fine young man instead, to help him with his new life." The silence in the room was absolute. Then, a single guest started to clap. I placed the envelope in Leo's trembling hand. He just stared at it, then at me, his mouth opening and closing with no sound. "For your education, or whatever you need?" I whispered to him. "Your parents raised you right." Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my head held high. The party was starting to buzz with shocked whispers. Tiffany hurried after me, her heavy dress rustling on the carpet. She grabbed my arm just before I reached the lobby doors. "Carol, what do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her face twisted with fury. "That money was for us. It was Dad's money." I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back into her eyes. I smiled gently. "Oh, Tiffany, it's just so chaotic. You had to squeeze people in. You understand?" I pulled my arm free, turned, and walked out into the cool evening air. The drive home was quiet. The car smelled faintly of the rose perfume I had dabbed on my wrists hours earlier. I pulled into my garage, and the automatic door rumbled shut, closing out the world. Inside, the house was silent, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I slipped off my heels by the door and walked in my stocking feet across the cool tile of the kitchen. My phone, which I'd left on the counter, had 7 missed calls, all from Tiffany. 2 were from Mark. A text message from my friend Martha simply said, "Wow, call me when you get home. I have the good gossip." I ignored them all. I filled my kettle with water and set it on the stove. While it heated, I went into the living room and turned on a small lamp beside my favorite armchair. The soft yellow light pooled on the knitting in my basket. I sat down, pulled the familiar weight of my afghan over my lap, and closed my eyes. The whistle of the kettle was the only sound I wanted to hear. The next morning was Sunday. I put on my navy blue dress and the string of pearls Robert had given me for our 5th anniversary. At church, the air smelled of old wood and lemon polish. I could feel the whispers as I walked down the aisle to my usual pew. They followed me like little draughts of cold air. After the service, during coffee hour in the fellowship hall, Martha hurried over with 2 styrofoam cups. "You are the talk of the town, Carol Archer," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Half the people think you're a saint, and the other half think you've lost your mind. As long as they aren't calling me boring," I said, taking a sip of the weak coffee. Just then, Susan Mills, a woman from Tiffany's mother's bridge club, drifted over. "Carol, dear," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm sure you didn't mean to cause such a scene. Tiffany is just devastated." I looked at her over the rim of my cup. "It's funny," I said calmly. I wasn't devastated at all when she sat me by the garbage cans, just enlightened. Susan's mouth opened, then snapped shut. She turned and walked away. Martha squeezed my arm. A few days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't in a fancy law office envelope, as I might have expected. The handwriting on the front was young and a little bit shaky. I slit it open with my butter knife right there at the kitchen table. The morning sun streamed in, making dust motes dance in the air. It was from Leo. He wrote that he had deposited the check, but that he felt he couldn't keep it. He said it was too much, that he hadn't done anything to deserve it. He wanted to meet, to talk, to give it back if I insisted. He wrote that his mother had cried when he told her. He left his phone number at the bottom of the page. I folded the letter and put it on the counter next to my grocery list. I looked at his number for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. "Leo?" I said when he answered. "This is Carol Archer. I would be delighted to meet you for a cup of coffee. But we will not be discussing you returning the money. We met at a small bakery downtown that smelled of sugar and roasting coffee beans." Leo sat across from me in a little wooden booth, turning his paper cup around and around in his hands. He looked even younger in the daylight. "Mrs. Archer, He started, his face earnest. "My mom and I, this changes everything for us. I can finish my nursing program without taking out more loans, but it doesn't feel right." I took a bite of my lemon scone. It was buttery and tart. "Leo," I said, dabbing my lips with a napkin. "My husband, Robert, was a generous man. He believed in rewarding hard work and good character. You showed both." I paused, looking out the window at the people passing by on the sidewalk. "After he died, my place in the family changed. It happened so slowly I barely noticed." He looked at me, waiting. "I didn't die," I told him, my voice quiet but clear. "I just stopped being convenient." That evening, there was a loud, angry knock on my front door. Not a polite rap, but a heavy thudding that shook the little stained glass window. I knew who it was before I opened it. Tiffany stood on my porch, her face pale and pinched. Mark was right behind her, his arms crossed over his chest like a bodyguard. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the entryway. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, staying by the door. The cool night air felt good. "That was my inheritance," she snapped, her voice rising. "Dad wanted me to have that money for a house." "Your father wanted you to have a wedding gift," I corrected her gently. "I brought it. You received a different gift instead, a lesson in courtesy." "You did it to humiliate me." I looked at her, at this angry stranger who wore my late husband's daughter's face. "No, Tiffany," I said, my voice perfectly level. "You were humiliated the moment you decided a person's worth was based on where you seated them at a party. This was just the bill." I opened the door wider. "Good night." Mark and Tiffany left a trail of angry silence on my porch. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt into place, and the satisfying click echoed in the quiet entryway. I didn't feel shaken. I felt clean, like I had finally scrubbed a stubborn spot off the floor. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and took it out to the back porch. The crickets were starting their nightly song. The air smelled of damp earth and my neighbour's blooming jasmine. I sat in my old wicker chair and watched the first stars appear in the sky. The next week, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Barbara Finch, Robert's cousin," a woman who sent a Christmas card every year with a long typed letter about her children's achievements, but who hadn't called me once when Robert was sick. I let it ring 4 times, then picked up. Carol, dear, she started, her voice full of fake concern. I heard there was a little misunderstanding at the wedding. Tiffany is just beside herself. I looked at a fat robin pulling a worm from my lawn. It was all very clear, Barbara. There was no misunderstanding. Well, you know how girls are on their wedding day, she cooed. She's just a child, really. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Robert would have wanted you to forgive and forget. The robin flew off with its prize. Robert would have wanted his daughter to seat her father's widow at a table with the family, I said, my voice pleasant. Not next to the dishwashers. Some things are out of our hands, aren't they? I hung up before she could answer. Martha came over for lunch on Tuesday. She brought a homemade apple pie, still warm from her oven. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled my kitchen. We sat at my little kitchen table, the one where Robert and I used to read the morning paper. So, the latest from the gossip mill? Martha said, cutting a large slice of pie for me. Susan Mills is telling everyone you're having a breakdown. That grief has finally made you snap. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that started deep in my belly. Oh, I haven't felt this sane in years, Martha. It's wonderful. I think it is too, she said, her smile warm. But what are you going to do now? You're free, Carol. All that time you spent looking after Robert, and then worrying about Tiffany. It's your time now. I took a bite of pie. It was sweet and perfect. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe I'll finally plant that vegetable garden I've always talked about. A week later, a thick, cream-coloured envelope arrived in the mail. It had the name of a fancy law firm embossed in the corner. I sat down at the dining room table to open it. The house was quiet, except for the slow, steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. The letter was short and cold. It was from Mark and Tiffany's lawyer. It accused me of misappropriating family funds and demanded the immediate return of the $25,000, which it called a pre-inheritance gift intended for Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. I read it twice. I didn't feel fear. I felt tired of their greed. I went to the old wooden filing cabinet in my office, the one Robert had used for his papers. I pulled out a folder labelled House. Inside was a copy of Robert's will, which left everything to me, his wife. I found the bank statements showing the money from the sale of our home deposited into my personal account. The home I had owned, free and clear, upon his death. I picked up the phone and called my own lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense man named Mr. Henderson. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," I said. "I seem to have received a very threatening piece of fan mail. I think you'll find it amusing." The next day, Leo called me. His voice was bright and full of energy, a happy sound that cut through the stuffiness of the lawyer's letter. "Mrs. Archer, it's Leo. I just wanted to tell you I paid my final year's tuition in full this morning, and I bought a 2012 Honda Civic, so I don't have to take the bus to my clinicals anymore." I was standing by the window, looking at the spot in the backyard where I planned to put my tomato plants. A little patch of sun, right by the fence. "That's wonderful news, Leo. A reliable car is a blessing." "It is," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea. My mum said to tell you she's praying for you every night." "You just tell your mother to save her prayers for someone who needs them," I said warmly. "And you study hard. You hear me? Make an old woman proud." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. The sun was shining on my future garden. Mr. Henderson called me back 2 days later. His voice was dry, like rustling autumn leaves. "Carol, I've sent a response to Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's attorney. I included a copy of Robert's will and the relevant bank statements. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sketching out a plan for my garden on a napkin. Tomatoes, zucchini, a row of herbs. And what did you say, Mr. Henderson? I said. He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. That the money was a gift from your personal account, given of your own free will, and that if they contacted you again with such baseless threats, you would consider it harassment. That sounds about right, I said, drawing a little box for Basil. I don't think you'll be hearing from them again, Carol, he added. At least not through legal channels. He was right. The silence from their side was immediate and complete. With the legal nonsense behind me, I felt a new kind of energy. I woke up early, the way I used to when Robert was alive, but now the morning was my own. I went to the local nursery, a sprawling place that smelled of damp soil and fertilizer. I spent 2 hours wandering the aisles, touching the fuzzy leaves of tomato seedlings and breathing in the sharp scent of marigolds. I bought a wheelbarrow, 3 bags of topsoil, and more plants than I could probably manage. A young man with dirt under his fingernails helped me load everything into the trunk of my car. "Starting a big garden, ma'am?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's my first one," I told him, feeling a little thrill of excitement. Better late than never. He grinned. "That's the spirit. Just give 'em lots of sun and water and they'll do the rest." Martha came over to help me dig. We spent a whole Saturday in the sun, turning over the soil and pulling up stubborn weeds. The work was hard, my back ached, and my hands were sore, but it was a good kind of tired. We drank lemonade on the porch afterward, leaving muddy prints on the steps. "You know," Martha said, fanning her face with her garden hat, "the ladies at the quilting circle are taking sides, Team Carol or Team Tiffany." "Oh, for heaven's sake," I said, laughing. "It's not a football game." "Well, you're winning," she said with a wink. "Turns out a lot of people have stories about Tiffany's special spots for inconvenient relatives. Your little speech opened the floodgates." I shook my head, but I couldn't help but feel a small, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. A month after the wedding, I received an invitation in the mail. It was for a community art class at the senior centre. Introduction to Watercolour. The paper was thick, and the image on the front was a soft, blurry painting of a lakeside sunset. I had never held a paintbrush in my life, except to touch up the trim on the house. I remembered Robert telling me once, years ago, "You have an artist's eye, Carol. You see colours nobody else does." I had dismissed it then. I was too busy being a wife, a caregiver, a stepmother. I pinned the invitation to the corkboard in my kitchen, right next to a seed packet for cucumbers. I looked at it every day for a week. The thought of walking into a room of strangers, of trying something new and failing, was terrifying. But the thought of sitting at home, waiting for the phone to not ring, was worse. On the first day of class, I almost turned the car around twice. The senior centre smelled of coffee and floor wax. I walked into the art room and saw a dozen other people, mostly women my age, setting up little jars of water and paper. My hands felt clumsy. The teacher was a woman with kind eyes and paint stains on her blouse. "Welcome, everyone," she said with a warm smile. "There's only one rule in this class. There are no mistakes, only opportunities." I sat at a table by the window. The woman next to me, whose name was Eleanor, showed me how to wet the paper first. My first attempt at a red apple looked more like a bleeding tomato. But as I dipped the brush in the clean water, watched the blue pigment swirl and spread across the page, I felt a quiet joy. It was the colour of the sky, right in front of me, a sky I was making all by myself. My days fell into a new rhythm. Tuesdays were for watercolour class. Thursdays were for the quilting circle with Martha. Most mornings, I was in my garden. I learned the satisfaction of pulling a perfect red tomato from the vine, still warm from the sun. The house, once so quiet it felt empty, was now filled with the smell of fresh-cut basil and the sight of my clumsy paintings taped to the refrigerator door. I started having lunch once a month with Eleanor from art class. She was a widow, too, a funny woman with a loud laugh who always wore bright, colourful scarves. We'd go to the same little diner every time, the one with the cracked red vinyl booths and the best tuna melts in town. "My son is worried I'm spending his inheritance on paintbrushes," she told me one day, stirring her iced tea. I told him, "Dear, it stopped being your inheritance the day your father died. Now it's my paintbrush fund." We both laughed so hard, the waitress came over to see if we were all right. It felt good to talk to someone who just understood. One afternoon, I was weeding my zucchini patch when a familiar car pulled up to the curb. It was Tiffany's white SUV. I hadn't seen or heard from her since her angry visit to my porch. I stayed where I was, kneeling in the soft dirt, and watched her get out. She was wearing a crisp business suit that looked out of place on my quiet suburban street. She walked up the driveway and stood on the edge of the lawn, careful not to get her expensive shoes dirty. "Carol," she said. Her voice was flat, without the usual sweetness or anger. "Tiffany?" I said, not getting up. I pulled another weed, its roots making a soft tearing sound as they came free. "What can I do for you?" "I'm pregnant," she said, just like that. She rested a hand on her stomach. I couldn't see any change in her figure from where I sat. "It's a boy. We're going to name him Robert." I looked at her for a long moment. The sun was warm on my back. A bee buzzed lazily around my tomato blossoms. I thought of my Robert, his kind hands, his gentle smile. Naming a child is a powerful thing. Sometimes it's an honor. Sometimes it's a tool. "That's nice," I said, my voice even. I went back to my weeding. Her face tightened. This was not the reaction she had expected. "Well, he's your husband's only grandchild. Your only grandchild." "He will be your son, Tiffany," I said, finally looking up at her. "Not a continuation of Robert. He will be his own person." I stood up then, brushing the dirt from my knees. My joints ached a little. "Is that all you came to tell me?" "I thought you would be happy," she said, a hint of a whine in her voice. "I thought you'd want to be involved. For little Robert's sake." I walked over to the garden hose and began to gently water my plants. The fine spray caught the sunlight and made a tiny rainbow in the air. "Involvement is a two-way street, Tiffany. You can't pave it with insults one day and expect it to lead to my front door the next." "So that's it? You're just cutting us off? Over a stupid table?" Her voice rose, sharp and ugly. "It was never about the table," I said quietly, turning the water off. "It was about the respect that should have come with it." I looked at my house, my garden, the quiet life I was building. It was peaceful. It was mine. "I'm not cutting you off. I'm just not where you left me anymore." She stared at me, her mouth a thin, hard line. She had come expecting a sentimental old woman, an easy source of money and babysitting for the new baby. She had found a stranger standing in a garden. Without another word, she turned, got back in her big, clean car, and drove away. I watched until the SUV was out of sight. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt a quiet sense of finality, like closing a book after the last page. I went back to my garden. The earth smelled rich and alive under my hands. I picked a ripe tomato, wiped it on my apron, and took a bite. It tasted of sunshine. Later that evening, I called Mr. Henderson. "I need to make some changes to my will, please," I said. I told him I wanted to leave a small, fixed amount to my future grandchild, in a trust for his education. The rest, the house, the savings, everything. I wanted it to go somewhere else. I had an idea. It involved a certain nursing program at the local community college. The new will was signed and filed away. Mr. Henderson had called it the Archer Nursing Scholarship. The name made me smile. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The future of my home, of Robert's, and my life together was settled. It would go toward kindness. My watercolor class decided to have a little art show at the senior center. We each picked our two best paintings to hang. I chose a picture of my tomato plants, the red fruits bright against the green leaves, and another one of the sunrise I could see from my kitchen window. I was nervous, my stomach fluttering like a trapped moth. "What if people think they're awful?" I asked Eleanor as we set up our easels. The room smelled of old coffee and fresh paint. "Who cares what they think?" she said, adjusting a painting of her cat. "We didn't paint them for people, we painted them for us." Leo came to the art show. He had graduated from his nursing program and was working at the county hospital. He brought his mother, a small, smiling woman with the same kind eyes as her son. She hugged me tightly, her hands surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear, her voice thick with an accent I couldn't place. "You gave my son his dream." "He earned it himself," I said, patting her back. "I just opened a door." Leo looked at my painting of the sunrise. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Archer. You really captured the colors." He pointed to a soft pink streak in the clouds. "That's my favorite part." I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the crowded room. It was pride. A few months later, I got a birth announcement in the mail. A stiff, glossy card with a picture of a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Robert Mark Thompson. He had a shock of dark hair and a serious expression. There was no personal note, just the printed details. I put the card on my mantelpiece, next to a photo of my Robert. They didn't look alike at all. I sent a gift, of course. I went to a nice children's store and bought a beautiful hand-knitted blanket, a silver rattle, and a stack of classic children's books. I wrapped them in cheerful paper with yellow ducks on it. I sent it to their address with a simple card. "Congratulations on your new son. Wishing you all the best. Carol." I didn't expect a thank you, and I didn't get one. Christmas was approaching. The air grew crisp, and the neighbors started putting up their lights. I usually spent Christmas Eve with Tiffany and her mother, a strained, quiet affair. This year, the invitation never came. I wasn't surprised. I was a little relieved. Instead, Martha invited me to her family's Christmas Eve dinner. Her house was loud and chaotic, filled with the shouts of grandchildren and the smell of roasting turkey and pine needles. It was messy and wonderful. Her son-in-law insisted I try his homemade eggnog. It was strong enough to peel paint, but it warmed me from the inside out. "Are you sad, not being with Tiffany?" Martha asked me quietly in the kitchen as we were loading the dishwasher. The noise from the living room was a happy roar. I thought for a moment, watching the steam rise from the machine. "I'm sad for the relationship we could have had," I said honestly. "But I'm not sad to be here, with you. This feels more like family than I've felt in a long time." On Christmas morning, I woke up to a quiet house. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the world in a soft, clean white. My garden was asleep under its winter blanket. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat in my armchair, watching the light change on the snow. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Leo standing on my porch, his cheeks red from the cold. He was holding a large poinsettia plant, its red leaves a startling splash of colour against the white snow. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Archer," he said, smiling. "My mom and I were on our way to my aunt's house, but we wanted to stop by. We didn't want you to be alone today." My throat felt tight. I stepped back and held the door open wide. "Come in, Leo," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Come in out of the cold. I'll put on another pot of coffee." He stepped inside, bringing the scent of winter and the warmth of unexpected kindness into my home. Years passed, soft and quiet as falling snow. My hair grew whiter, and the lines around my eyes deepened, but they were laugh lines. My garden flourished. I learned to can my own tomatoes and make zucchini bread that won a blue ribbon at the county fair. My watercolours improved from blurry messes to paintings I was proud to hang on my own walls. The Archer Nursing Scholarship helped its first student, a young single mother, finish her degree. I met her at a small ceremony at the college. She cried when she shook my hand. "You have no idea what this means," she said. "It's not just the money. It's knowing someone believed in me." I thought of Leo, and I knew exactly what she meant. One day, I was at the grocery store, deciding between Navel and Valencia oranges, when I heard a familiar voice. "Carol, is that you?" I turned. It was Tiffany. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her expensive suit was rumpled. A little boy with dark, serious eyes was fidgeting in the cart beside her. Little Robert. He must have been about 5. "Hello, Tiffany," I said calmly. I never see you anymore," she said, shifting her weight. It was an accusation, not an observation. "I'm usually at home or at the senior centre," I replied, placing a bag of oranges in my cart. "You know where I live." The little boy pointed a chubby finger at me. "Are you the lady in the picture, Mommy?" he asked. Tiffany's face flushed. She had kept my picture on the mantel after all. "Yes, sweetie. This is your grandmother Carol." He looked at me with Robert's solemn gaze. "Hello," he said shyly. "Hello, Robert," I said, my voice soft. I smiled at him, a real smile. He was just a little boy, an innocent in all of this. He wasn't a tool or a legacy. He was himself. He smiled back, a quick, shy flash of baby teeth. Tiffany looked from me to her son, a complicated expression on her face. Regret? Anger? I couldn't tell. "Well," she said finally, her voice brittle, "we should go. Mark's waiting." She pushed her cart away without a real goodbye. I watched them go, the little boy looking back at me over his mother's shoulder until they turned the corner into the cereal aisle. I felt a pang of sadness for him, but none for myself. The next spring, my friend Eleanor and I took a trip. We drove up the coast to see the ocean. We rented a small cottage right on the beach that smelled of salt and old wood. We spent our days walking on the sand, collecting seashells, and painting the waves. My arthritis bothered me in the damp air, but I didn't mind. One evening, we sat on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, drinking tea and watching the sun set over the water. The sky was a blaze of orange and pink, the colours I had once tried so hard to capture on paper. "Do you ever have regrets, Carol?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet. I thought about the wedding, the little table by the kitchen, Tiffany's cold eyes. I thought about the long, quiet years caring for Robert. I thought about the anger and the hurt. It all felt very far away, like a story that had happened to someone else. "I regret not starting my garden sooner," I said, "and I regret not learning to paint when I was a young woman. But the rest of it? No. It brought me here." On our last morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic shush of the waves on the shore. I put on my robe and slippers and walked out onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The air was cool and clean. I sat in a creaky wooden chair and watched the sky slowly lighten, turning from deep indigo to a soft, pearly grey. A few gulls cried out as they wheeled over the water. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't expecting a phone call. I wasn't needed. I was just there, watching the sun rise over my ocean. The first sliver of gold appeared on the horizon, and I took a slow sip of my coffee. The warmth spread through me, and I felt perfectly, peacefully free.